We're still digesting the shocking and controversial plea deal that will put Bryan Kohberger behind bars for the rest of his life. The man charged with killing 4 University of Idaho students will be spared the death penalty if this plea deal goes through. So many people, including the families of some of the victims, are shocked. They're asking for the court to reject this deal. Why would the prosecution make a deal when they had a mountain of evidence, it seems, that could have sent Kohberger to the firing squad? We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Jury selection was set to begin in the trial of Bryan Kohberger little more than a month from now on August 4th. But then yesterday, this bombshell drops that Bryan Kohberger will not stand trial because he's accepted a plea deal. Under this deal, Kohberger is pleading guilty to all the charges he faces: the murders of Kaylee Gonsalves, Madison Mogen, Zena Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. Kohberger will serve 4 consecutive life sentences, and he also gets the maximum 10 years on a burglary charge. As part of this deal, he can't appeal, so if this goes through, that is it. Kohberger, though, gets to live out his days in prison, not on death row in Idaho, where he could have been put to death by firing squad. Not only is it shocking that this is how the criminal case could end, but we're also learning about how this deal was negotiated over the past several days and the communication that prosecutors say they had with family members of some of the victims. And when I tell you what prosecutors did, you may understand why those family members are so upset. I'll get to that in just a moment, but let's talk about how we got to this point and take a look at the massive amount of evidence that prosecutors were going to be armed with if this case had gone to trial. Testimony was going to begin on August 18th in Boise. Now, if you've been following this story, you know what happened inside this house on King Street in the college town of Moscow, Idaho, on November 13th, 2022. How could any of us forget? It was in the early hours of the morning, and if this plea deal goes through, we can say Bryan Kohberger entered this house and killed those 4 students. According to police, the students were killed between 4 and 4:25 in the morning. It wasn't until later that morning, just before noon, that the surviving roommates called 911 for what they thought was one of their roommates not waking up after a night of drinking.
911 location of your emergency.
Hi, something is happening. Something happened in our house. We don't know what.
What is the address of the emergency?
1122.
What is the rest of the address?
Oh, Kings Road.
Okay. And is that a house or an apartment?
It's a house.
Can you repeat the address to make sure that I have it right?
I'll talk to you guys. We live at the White, so we're next to them.
I need someone to repeat the address for verification.
The address?
Then on that call, one of the surviving roommates tries to explain what they say they saw early in the morning.
And tell me exactly what's going on.
One of the roommates is passed out, and she was drunk last night and she's not waking up.
Okay.
Oh, and they saw some man in their house last night. Yeah. Hi, this is.
And are you with the patient? Okay, I need someone to keep the phone, stop passing it around.
Can I just tell you what happened pretty much?
What is going on currently? Is someone passed out right now?
I don't really know, but pretty much at 4 a.m.
Okay, I need to know what's going on right now if someone is passed out. Can you find that out?
Yeah, I'll come. Come on, we gotta go check. But we have to. Is he passed out? What's wrong? She's not waking up.
When police arrived, they found those 4 friends dead. They had all been stabbed to death. Later, we would learn one of the surviving roommates said that they saw a man in their house early in the morning and that he had bushy eyebrows. For weeks, police investigated without making an arrest, but they had more evidence than they were letting on. On December 30th, they announced they had arrested a 30-year-old PhD criminology student from nearby Washington State University. His name was Bryan Kohberger.
Good afternoon, folks. My name is Bill Thompson. I'm the Lee-Tai County prosecutor. And it's sad to be here, but happy to be here at the same time. As Chief Fry indicated, a criminal complaint was filed yesterday here in Lee-Tai County, charging the defendant, Mr. Kohberger, with 4 counts of first-degree murder, in addition to felony burglary, which involves entering the residence with the intent to commit the crime of murder.
Kohberger was originally from Pennsylvania. He was arrested at his parents' house in the Poconos. Here's video from when he was flown back to Idaho after his arrest. 2 weeks before his arrest, though, police had pulled him over twice in Indiana while he was driving back for winter break with his dad cross country. Before we get back to this episode of On the Case, I want to bring you a law and crime legal alert. Did you know that children under 21 are being diagnosed with serious conditions like type 2 diabetes and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and there's research potentially linking ultra-processed foods to these outcomes? Our partners at Morgan & Morgan are stepping in to fight to hold food companies accountable. With decades of experience fighting large corporations, they're ready to stand up for families who deserve justice. So if your child under 21's been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes or non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, go to www.forthepeople.com/food. You can also scan the QR code on your screen or click the link below for more information. Here's body cam video from the first traffic stop, and you can see Kohberger behind the wheel. Then here's the second traffic stop by Indiana State Police later that day.
Hello.
How you doing?
How y'all doing today? Good, good. Take a look at your driver's license real quick if I could. See, he's right up on that van, man. He was right up on the back end of that van. Pulled you over for tailgating. Is this your car?
Yes.
Okay. Cool. Where are you headed?
Well, we're coming from WSU, and we're standing early.
What's WSU?
University, basically. That is SWAT team and everything.
So we're okay. I'm having a hard time hearing you because of the traffic. So you're coming from Washington State University?
Yeah.
And you're going where? Oh.
We're going to be going to Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay.
Mountains. Yeah. So we're slightly punchy because we're driving for hours.
Hours, days.
Hours to drive. Well,
Yeah.
almost a day.
Okay. And what did you say about some SWAT team thing? Or
Yeah,
something?
there was a mass shooting and everything. We don't know if it's a mass
Where?
This was on essentially that's the malady.
Interesting.
Well, it's horrifying because you go to the university, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. So y'all work at the university there? Or?
I actually do work there.
Oh.
PhD in criminal.
Okay. Okay.
But we've learned over the more than 2 years since his arrest that Bryan Kohberger was not some college kid who needed his dad to ride with him for company on a trip home for Christmas. Police say in the bed of victim Madison Mogan, law enforcement found a knife sheath. Law enforcement tested the sheath and the DNA came back and matched Bryan Kohberger. Beyond the DNA match, Bryan Kohberger's Amazon purchase history showed that he bought the exact same kind of knife sheath in 2022, months before the murders. Kohberger's defense tried to argue that the sheath should be thrown out as evidence in this case if it went to trial. One of the reasons they argued could have been that it was planted. They also said that the genetic genealogy techniques that matched Kohberger's DNA was shaky. The judge didn't buy that, ruled against the defense in March of this year. Bryan Kohberger's shopping also included another key piece of evidence, a balaclava ski mask. Kohberger bought one from Dick's Sporting Goods in 2022. It is the same kind of mask that a surviving roommate described the intruder with bushy eyebrows wearing the morning that her friends were killed. Perhaps his defense could argue that you need a mask like this if you were to survive a winter in the Pacific Northwest. But let's face it, the evidence at this point was piling up. Then Let's go to the cell phone data. This is a map of where prosecutors believe Bryan Kohberger may have traveled on the night of the 13th. Kohberger's phone pinged a cell tower that showed him south of Pullman, Washington, around 2:47 in the morning. Then, 4:48 in the morning, he was close to the murder scene in Idaho. His defense tried to argue in motions that Kohberger was just a night owl. He loved to go out for long drives and gaze at the stars, but we can see the evidence here mounting more and more. Then you have the wave of evidence that came down over the last month through an episode of NBC's Dateline. The episode detailed more evidence that prosecutors had in this case, including a new video of a car driving around Moscow near the murder scene that resembled Kohberger's on the night those 4 students were killed. It was a white Hyundai Elantra, potentially the same car that Kohberger is seen driving here in a traffic stop on the campus of Washington State on October 22nd, less than a month before the murders.
I stopped you, man, when you were driving by me there. You're a little too close to the back of that semi. You're about one car between you and the back of this trailer. We're about one car going 10 miles an hour, so we're going 60 or 70 miles an hour. We're about 6 or 7 cars. So oh, you guys did?
Yeah, and you said that. So.
Not only was Kohberger's car potentially spotted on camera, one of the victims, Zener Kernodle, ordered food around 4 o'clock in the morning on DoorDash. That's right before police say she was murdered. That DoorDash driver says she saw Kohberger.
Jimmy, this is 2 different ones. Jordan's not talking to me. Please. Are you coming?
This is body cam video we received over the past 2 weeks. It's of a woman who was arrested in Washington State, and she claimed that she was the DoorDash driver. This is her being interviewed after she was arrested for DUI.
And then now I have to testify. Make murder case too, so yeah, because I'm the DoorDash driver, so yeah.
You have to testify in which murder case?
Murder case for the college girls.
Oh.
My DoorDash driver, I saw Bryan during Easter.
This woman says that she saw Bryan Kohberger with her 2 eyes at the scene on the morning of the murders. She would be a key witness if this case were to go to trial, even though you could assume the defense would try to discredit her based on the substance abuse challenges that she says that she's had. But then come the selfies. This is one prosecutors were prepared to use as evidence. Kohberger smiling in what appears to be a bathroom. This was taken in the hours after the murders. Prosecutors plan to use it to show just how bushy Kohberger's eyebrows were to match up with that eyewitness account from inside the home of that surviving roommate. Not only that, prosecutors say Kohberger's phone had pictures saved of college-aged girls who went to the University of Idaho and Washington State. Some of them were friends of and social media followers of the 3 girls killed in the King Street home. That's all according to the episode on NBC's Dateline. And here's more. Kohberger also searched on social media about serial killer Ted Bundy. Perhaps the defense could argue that it was all just related to his schoolwork as he was working towards his PhD in criminology. One piece of evidence that the prosecution, though, would not have if this were to go to trial is the home on King Street. It was demolished in December 2023 after the University of Idaho bought the home. The school said that law enforcement and prosecutors were able to inspect the house before it was taken down, but the family of Kaylee Gonsalves criticized this move. The school said that they were doing it because it was a grim reminder of the murders. But you have to wonder, could it have been a place that prosecutors could have brought the jury if this case had gone to trial? In the days after the murders, as the story gained national attention, prosecutors also say internet search history shows that Bryan Kohberger watched content about the murders that had happened in Moscow, even watched content here on Law&Crime. Throughout the lead up to the August trial date, Kohberger's defense tried to get a lot of the evidence that we've been talking about excluded from a trial, but many of their motions were denied. This past week, the judge denied the defense the ability to present an argument that there are other people who should be looked at as the suspect for these murders. If found guilty at trial, Kohberger would have faced the death penalty, and in Idaho, that is by firing squad. The defense tried to argue that Kohberger is on the autism spectrum and therefore he should be excluded from the death penalty, but the judge denied that motion as well. So let's get into how this plea deal came about. According to ABC News, it was the defense that came to the prosecution last week asking to be presented with an offer. In their letters to families, prosecutors say they met with family members and then they made a formal offer to the defense. And victims' family members are not happy about it. Kaylee Gonzalez's family posted on Facebook within minutes of the news of a deal going public that they're mad. They went on to say, quote, "I would like to clarify a couple of things. We did talk to the prosecution on Friday about the possibility of a plea deal, and it was a hard no from our family. Sunday night, we received an email that sent us scrambling. We immediately jumped into panic mode and started making phone calls and sending emails. We met with prosecution again today to reiterate our views on pushing for the death penalty. Unfortunately, all of our efforts did not matter. We did our best. We fought harder than anyone could ever imagine. Please do not argue or try to tell us that we should have done this or that. We gave it 200% for the last 2 years and 7 months. One day, we will tell you all what we have really been through from day one. You will all be shocked. We fought a long battle, but we lost the war. We did gain an army of love that we know will always stand by us. We have so much love for each and every one of you. You all gave us strength when we felt like we couldn't take another step, called us off the ledge when we were ready to wave the white flag, and most importantly, prayed for us when we were in utter despair and hopeless. So much love to all of you." Zena Kernodle's aunt told TMZ that she too is angry. She met with the prosecutors as well, and she said she told them no to a plea deal. In their letters to families announcing the deal, prosecutors say they moved forward with the deal to spare families a trial and years of appeals that could come with a death penalty sentence. Let's dive more into this recent development out of Idaho with retired FBI agent Bobby Chacon. Bobby, I know you've been talking about this case for many years, as so many of us had. Just first, what was your reaction when you heard of this plea deal last night?
I was a little surprised. I think, it's late in the game. The trials are getting close, and he was denied. I mean, I guess I shouldn't be surprised because he was denied an extension. The defense was losing a lot of its pretrial motions, and those are the motions that they kind of try to position themselves for good things for them at trial, and they kept kind of losing those pretrial motions. And so I think that they got to the point where, they felt this might be the better deal, considering that the death penalty was still on the table.
Right. And in Idaho, it could have been the firing squad, though, who knows when that would have happened if he was found guilty of that, with just how the appeals process works. I don't know what it's like to be a prosecutor, to the pressure that they are under, especially in a high profile case, but you do have family members of some of the victims who have come forward saying that this is not what they wanted. In your experience, what type of impact do the wishes of a family have when making a decision like this where, look, at the end of the day, Bryan Kohberger, if this goes through, is going to spend the rest of his life in prison and there's no appeal process or anything like that?
Yeah, it's interesting. And not to sound, callous, but, I was an investigator. My job was always to get the bad guy off the street and into jail. And I never really considered myself a victim's advocate. My focus was almost solely on the perpetrator. And I worked with prosecutors who felt the same way. While we did, always consider the families of the victims, and we had victim witness counselors and specialists that dealt with the family. And so it's different because the prosecutors do not work for the families. They work for the people of the state of Idaho, and, keeping them safe and taking this guy off the street and not risking him ever getting out again is part of their job. And, and prosecutors often loathe the term slam dunk case because there never really is. I've taken several of my investigations that I was sure I had what would be considered a slam dunk case. to trial. And once that jury gets it, I was very surprised, in fact, especially my first few trials, how uncomfortable I was when those 12 people disappeared in the back of the courtroom. And I'm like, well, they could decide anything they want. I've been living this case 3, 4, 5 years. I've investigated it. I've interviewed everybody. I've done the surveillance. But now it's up to 12 people who knew nothing about the case, knew nothing about the people before this trial started. And it's a very, uncomfortable feeling that it could go either way. And so, the prosecutors felt in this case that they had a very strong case. And they felt like taking Bryan Kohberger out of the public, will keep the people of Idaho safer in the long run rather than going to trial. And quite frankly, you never know what might happen at trial.
Yeah, and again, I mean, they have filed so many motions over the past several years trying to exclude evidence. And even if that wouldn't have led to a conviction, I could see where the prosecution would say the amount of appeals that his team could file for decades to just string this thing out. I do understand that perspective, and I understand the family's frustration as well, because they have had to live this, and they'll live it for the rest of their lives, but they also, this trial, jury selection was going to begin on August 4th. And I think about the evidence too that prosecutors had in this case and what they could have had in a trial. For you as an investigator, if you had to say this was the damning piece of evidence, the smoking gun, if you will, for Bryan Kohberger, what stands out to you?
I think I would have to say the DNA on the sheath, the button on the sheath that was left, the knife sheath that was left in the victim's bed, covered in blood. And I think that was probably for me, the single biggest damning piece of evidence, because even the eyewitness that they have, saw bushy eyebrows, but, that's not a face-to-face identification. So even, an eyewitness identification can be very shaky sometimes when the person gets on the stand under, pretty talented cross-examination. So I think the most damning piece of evidence, if I had to just put one at the top, it would be that DNA on the button of the knife sheath that was clearly the murder weapon in the bed with the victim, and Bryan Kohberger's DNA on that sheath. That puts him at the murder scene. I think and it's scientific. It really can't be subject to too much cross-examination. They can try to kind of damage it or dirty it up, but I think to me, that was the single biggest piece of evidence.
In putting this episode together and revisiting the last couple of years and what's come out since Bryan Kohberger was arrested, but then, not that I forgot, but you just remember that time after it happened and there was the shock of what took place at the house. And then there was that moment where there were just a lot of questions for law enforcement of, are you ever going to catch the person who did this? And then there's the announcement that comes on December 30th that they have him. But for as much heat as law enforcement took at that time, they had the sheath, they were connecting it through DNA. You remember the Indiana State Patrol that as he was making his trip back, they do that traffic stop. As an investigator, how do you reflect on that time and how law enforcement kept so much close to the vest as they were facing a ton of criticism, not just from the community in Moscow, but really everybody across the country?
Well, except me, I guess, because I was pushing back on a lot of that criticism. It happened so quickly. This was a very complex crime scene, a multiple murder, and then in hindsight, a perpetrator that had no known connection to the victim. That's a very difficult case. And, these cases don't get solved that quickly. And so when even some of the family started, the cops aren't moving quick enough. I'm like, in the end, he was arrested, to me, in lightning quick fashion. I mean, that is a very short period of time. If you look at a case like the Delphi, Indiana case with the poor two little girls killed, it was 5 years before they made an arrest. And that's not uncommon. So a case like this with a very complicated crime scene, they had one piece of DNA. I think that they moved very quickly in this case. The arrest, certainly, if you look at the average murder case, the arrest came fairly quickly. Of course, most murderers, if they're connected to their victims, it happens quicker. But when you have a perpetrator that has no known connection to the victim, this happened rather quickly. And I think that, there was great police work done in this case to bring Bryan Kohberger, in custody that quickly.
And then even beyond just the knife sheath, which DNA connects to him, Amazon shows that he had bought the knife sheath. Then you add in the cell phone location, the Dateline episode comes out showing the selfie, shows the video. It just seems like it was this mounting, just the evidence just continued to mount over time. One piece of evidence that prosecutors won't have is the house, because that was destroyed by the university. I think of, had this gone to trial, I mean, taking the jury into that home, how that could have had an impact on them if you were prosecutors. What did you make of the decision to destroy the house ahead of a trial?
Yeah, I didn't mind it at all because not every jury actually goes to the scene of the crime, and I'm not a big fan of that move anyway. I think that, juries can kind of read into too much if they get. Now, remember that they were, crime scenes traditionally have extensive photographs. In this case, they did laser line scans. They could have put a 3D rendering in the courtroom of that entire house that probably could have given you as good a view as if you were there yourself. I think the emotional weight of being in a crime scene may outweigh the benefit. And so, I think you can bring, and they often do bring that crime scene into the courtroom through photographs, through video. And now they have these 3D renderings they can do with computers that kind of can put that jury right into the crime scene itself, rather than just kind of staying there in, standing there in the place where it comes. To me, it's a little macabre. And I think the benefit of that is not great compared to the fact that juries can kind of do their own scientific analysis, which you don't want them doing. That's not their job. And so I think that, they took a lot of photographs, they did a lot of renderings, and I don't think that would have necessarily impacted the case again. And also you have to remember, this is private property. It belongs to somebody. You're going to unduly burden a property owner with having to hold on to this this trial was actually going to happen quickly, but it could have been extended, even much further than this. So I don't think it was really that terrible a decision to allow the property to go. They got every piece of evidentiary value out of that location that they were going to get anyway, other than the jury actually walking through it, which I don't think is a big benefit.
You've investigated some really bad people in your career. I mean, that comes with the line of work and working in the FBI. And Bryan Kohberger is going to be a name that I don't think people are going to forget for a long time. What are some of the big questions you still have about him and what led up to these murders, that if he accepts this plea, that he is admitting that he did?
Yeah, and I think the important thing, and everyone should remember, he's going to have to allocute on the record. What that means is he's going to have to stand up in front of a judge, on the record, and it's got to be recorded, and he's got to admit what he did. He's got to admit that he did all of the elements of the crime that constitutes the crime that he's pleading guilty to. So he has to admit to the murders. Now, we may not get every single detail, but we're going to have to get a lot of details, and different judges required the defendants to kind of go into a little more detail than other judges. But, we're going to hear from Bryan Kohberger himself on the record about what he did. He's got to admit that on the record. They have to have it, as part of the court record. He's got to admit it. The judge may question him about, pull more facts out of him, because I've seen defendants allocute to crimes and they don't want to admit the whole thing. And the judge says, no, you have to tell me what you did. You have to tell me this, this, and this, because you have to meet the elements of the crime according to the statute of that state. And so we're going to find out from Bryan Kohberger himself on the record, what he did. That might not include motive, because motive oftentimes is not an element of the crime of murder, unless it's a hate crime or something like that. So we may not end up knowing that, but we're certainly going to know the physical acts that he carried out, to commit these murders. And so some of the mystery of his movements through the house and that we've been kind of speculating about, hopefully those things are going to be answered. The sequence is going to be answered. The why of it may or may not come through, but I've always considered the why, when you have a psychopathic murderer, their whys are not going to be any satisfying to us at all anyway. So I think we're going to find out his movements through the house, how it actually went down once he gets on the record and has to allocate to these crimes.
And when he goes on the record, because though he's been in court for a ton of hearings, it's usually, yes, one word type confirming he was there, and then his attorney does the talking. In the type of hearing we're expecting tomorrow in Boise, is he going to have to say more? Is he going to have to address the family members who may be in the gallery?
Yeah, it all depends on the judge. He may put the allocution off to another date, or he may take it tomorrow. I hope he takes it tomorrow, and so that then everything can be kind of settled. I don't know what the status is because each state is different. I don't know what the status is of victim impact statements are on a plea deal like this. Normally, when someone's sentenced, prior to sentencing, a judge will hear those victim, or a jury will hear those victim impact statements, and they're really geared towards, urging a heavier sentence usually. In this case, there is no heavier sentence. He's going to get what he's going to get. As you said, he's going to get life without the possibility of parole and waive all appeals. So those victim impact statements, I don't know if they're going to be given, but if they are, they're not going to impact the sentencing, so to speak, because, he's already agreed to take the highest sentence possible, which is life with no parole, no appeal. So, I don't know what we're going to hear tomorrow. The judge could put it off because the plea deal is brand new. The judge might want to review the deal. But it could be anywhere from delaying it till, another day next week or whatever, or it could be tomorrow. Well, we hear from Bryan Kohberger himself about what he did that night.
And I know you're not an attorney, but you know these cases as well as anyone. I know the family of Kaylee Gonsalves is calling on people to call Judge Hippler and tell him to reject this plea deal, which a judge theoretically could do. In your experience, what is the bar that a judge is looking for in accepting a plea deal as fair?
Okay. Well, actually, I am an attorney.
There we go. I apologize. I feel like I knew that too. I was saying it and I was like, wait a second, but no, go ahead. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Well, that helps
so,
then. Sure.
I mean, the judge, and again, every judge is different, but the judge really just has to kind of check off that everything was done properly procedurally. There is criminal procedure that has to be followed. So they're going to look at whether the right representations were made, whether he's doing this under duress, not under duress. He's going to look at, the basically what we call the four corners, the square of the deal. And the judge doesn't usually put himself in the position of this is a good deal or not a good deal. That's the prosecutor's discretion. The prosecutor has the discretion to enter into this deal. It's only if it's an improper deal. In other words, if they improperly coerced the deal, or they didn't tell the defense all of the things they had, any exculpatory material and discovery, things like that. So the judge really isn't there to pass judgment on whether the prosecutor should have made the deal or not, because that's, again, prosecutor discretion. That's what the prosecutor's job is. And so, and believe me, because there are certain systems overseas in Europe and things like that where the judges make the deals, where there are no juries and you have a 3-judge tribunal a lot of times hold the trial. But in this case, I think the judge will look just to make sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and that everybody's kind of met their burden, that the defense has met its burden of reviewing and doing right for their client. So, he can't later argue an ineffective assistance of counsel thing, which, is not a direct legal appeal issue, but he can say, hey, my attorneys kind of told me to go into this deal and they were wrong and it was a bad deal. So the judge will make sure that Bryan Kohberger's rights were protected by his attorneys in this process, and they'll make sure that the prosecutors acted properly in providing all the information and providing the right deal. And so I don't think the judge will enter into whether or not the judge personally feels that this is a deal that should have been made or not made.
And with that, it was the defense that approached the prosecution. So their ability to present a defense, if this has gone to trial, of, well, wait, there's all these other suspects that police should have looked at, not our guy, Bryan Kohberger, that gets denied. And then apparently the defense reaches out to the prosecution and says, hey, make us a deal, make us an offer. How common is it that that's the way that these things play out?
I think it's pretty common in these kind of cases where, you're looking at a possible death penalty. I mean, I think it's almost malpractice if a lawyer doesn't at least see what the deal might be offered. Like, hey, what can you bring it back to your client? He may reject it or accept it, but at least see what the government might offer. Sometimes they say there is no offer, but at least you have to kind of request. And I think it's due diligence on the part of a defense attorney to at least reach out as you're losing these pretrial motions and you're realizing this evidence is going to go in front of a jury. This piece of evidence is going in front of the jury, that kind of thing. And so I think that it's due diligence for a defense attorney to at least go to the government and say, look, if my guy is willing to make a deal, what kind of deal would you be offering? And so at least you have that and you take it back to your client. Again, he can accept it or reject it, But I think you'd be doing your client a disservice if you didn't at least reach out and see what kind of deal it is and then relay it back to your client.
All right, Bobby Chacon, retired FBI agent and attorney. Thank you for taking the time to be with us on Law and Crime. It's always great to have you.
Anytime. Thank you.
This plea deal is expected to be presented to a judge tomorrow in Boise. That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.